Hi, the next poem we're going to look at is Funeral Blues by W.H. Auden. We'll start by looking at the structure of the poem, and as you can see, it is in 4 even quatrains. And we would call this an elegy. It is a poem about the loss of someone. In terms of structure, we can see that it is a first person narration because the personal pronoun I is used. So we get the idea that this is a very personal poem, a very poignant poem that explores the feelings and emotions of the death of a loved one. That may well be the key term in your question, so bear that in mind, okay? So the poem starts with a series of very strong imperatives. Stop all the clocks, cut off the phone, prevent the dogs from barking, silence the pianos, bring out the coffin. So we get the idea that the speaker has got a strong control over how he wishes to mourn the death of a loved one. He deals with very everyday events, the dog, the pianos, the telephones and the bone, and we get the sense that this is a very personal loss, but he does make it a suggestion that it could be a universal loss, how we grieve people in general. As you can see in the first stanza, and this continues through to the fourth stanza, there is a very steady rhyme scheme. It is your A and B. And this again coincides with the muffled drum so that we get a steady rhythm and a steady beat that would echo the idea of a funeral procession. Again, we get the idea of a universal grief. The speaker does not want to have contact with the world. His world now is the sense of loss that he is experiencing. If we move on to the muffled drum, this actually would have been quite a traditional way to signal the death of someone back in the Victorian era, and it was seen to be a sense of respect for the death of someone. As we continue on to our stanza 2, we get the idea of a little bit of personification coming in here with the line, let aeroplanes circle moaning overhead. And again, if we look at that verb moaning, it has a real sense of both assonance, and it also has the suggestion of almost like a funeral wail. This person is very vocal in his sense of grief. Okay. Again, we have this scribbling on the sky, the message, he is dead. I think it's particularly notable that the word dead has a capital at the beginning of it, because, again, it's an exclamatory phrase. It is a very short sentence, and again, it really creates this awful tone of loss, and also the speaker's attempt to try to come to terms with that. Again, if we look at the third line, the second stanza, we have a contrast of imagery. The crepe bows around the white necks, highly visual imagery, the use of colours. And again, we get this contrast between everyday life and the sense of loss that the speaker is experiencing. The suggestion of the public doves, again, we have this clear imagery of white. And again, in many cultures, white is seen as a symbolic colour of mourning. However, I think what Auden is trying to do here is to make sure that we have this imagery of the black and white, and how his life now has become a dark place despite the white, bright atmosphere of general life. And again, this is backed up and reinforced in the line, let the traffic policemen wear black cotton gloves. And again, we have this a symbol of mourning in the black cotton gloves, which again, people would have worn Victorian ties to symbolise that they were in fact in mourning. If you think about Queen Victoria and figures like that. And again, more visual imagery using colours and contrasts. If we move on to the third stanza, he was my north, my south, my east, my west. And there's quite a lot of analysis actually in this particular line, in so much as the use of the possessive pronoun my. And again, we get the idea of this was a very, very close relationship. And again, the feelings of enormous grief at this loss. And again, we have compass points here, as I'm sure you can see. And this is basically a metaphor for he was my world. And again, showing us how much this person is grieved and how much he is missed. And again, we have further continuation of this repetition and continuation of this possessive pronoun. Again, into the second and third lines, my working week, my Sunday rest, my noon, my midnight, my talk, my song. And again, we get a real sense that this is a life that's now incomplete, that everyday tasks and everyday rituals have been completely interrupted and will no longer ever be the same once again. Again, he talks in terms of my noon, my midnight, all the contrasts, my talk, my song. So lots of antithesis being used to show the contrasts and also to reinforce the sense that this person meant so much. And again, after this repetition of the pronouns and indeed the suggestion that the person who has died means so much, we have our caesura. And again, this will give us a very poignant pause to really reflect upon what this person's death has meant to somebody else. And again, to further reinforce the idea of it being first person speaker, we then have this use of the first person I. I thought my love would last forever. I was wrong. And again, I think if we look at the little colon for an additional pause, and again, this very short phrase, I was wrong, has a very poignant tone. The stars are not wanted now, put out every one, pack up the moon and dismantle the sun. And here we're coming to the final stanza of the poem. And with all poems, it's very important that you are looking for a tonal shift, particularly in the final couple of lines of stanzas, not just in this poem, but in any poem that you're studying. And again, if we look at the change of tenses, prior to this, the speaker has been in past tense, and now he has changed to present tense. The stars are not wanted now, and again a further caesura, put out every one. And he almost returns to how he started, with again these very poignant imperatives. But again, this time it is in the present tense, and again that follows alongside of the first stanza as well. The stars are not wanted now, put every one. And again, this suggests that he wants to return to darkness. He wants to return to a world without light, a world without life. And again, the stars here are being used metaphorically to indicate his departure from normal life and how grief has left him so bereft. Pack up the moon and dismantle the sun. And again, it's interesting that he talks about planetary symbols, again, which determine our lives. The moon will have a 28-day cycle. The sun obviously has rises and falls. And again, with this relation to the planets, he is basically saying he has removed himself from the earth and everything that is suggested with it. Again, pour away the ocean and sweep up the wood. So he changes from planetary subjects then on to nature. And again, this wonderful personification and pour away the ocean. Again, he wants his world to be desolate, to be dry, to have no sign of life, because he has lost the love of his life. For nothing can now ever come to any good. Again, that final line is very emphatic, and again we get the suggestion that he is in a permanent state of grief. Emphatic ending. Okay. Just a little bit of AO4 about this poem. Auden was rumoured to be gay or homosexual, and he had many lovers, but most of them were quite clandestine, because during this time of the poem being written, homosexuality was actually illegal in England and other countries. And many people have suggested that this poem, because he uses the third person he and that personal pronoun, that it is a way of him acknowledging the love of his life through his poetry. So therefore there is a certain amount of controversy in terms of the context and the era in which it was written. But again, it is no doubt very poignant and, as I say, highly metaphorical throughout. Good use of personification. Again, the punctuation has to be considered, the rhyme scheme, and again, the speaker. So that's really it. Thank you.